Alright, today we've got this house. We're doing all this green algae on the deck, and then we're doing a full house wash. This place has quite a bit of algae all over it. Do this whole house wash. All these deck railings. Alright, so here you see me using the fan tip to spray a house wash mix on this deck. I start with a house wash mix, usually about 1%, maybe a little bit less. This one is a little bit less than 1%. The rule I follow is the least necessary to get the job done, meaning the least amount of chemical necessary to get the job done, and that does a couple things. One, it reduces the likelihood of damage, and two, it helps when you get to rinse phase so that you're not having to rinse off so long. So I use the fan tip to cover all surfaces. These railings, you have to make sure you get every angle because there's lots of little divots and crevices that you can easily miss. So you got to get it from the top, from the sides, from the bottom as best you can. So this deck was about 1,000 square feet, and I went ahead and covered the entire thing because it was cloudy. Just know that when you cover the entire deck like this, you have to keep it wet. So when you go to rinse phase, you've got to make sure you kind of spritz the deck as you go to keep the entire thing wet while you're cleaning each section. Here you can see on the back side of those railings how nasty it is. And in a few of these shots, you might be able to see on the railing toppers how they're really dark in the corners. So you want to pay attention to all of that. You see me kind of covering some of the house here, just the bottom of the house where it's really gross. We ended up doing a house wash on this house, so we were going to cover it anyway, but it was really gross down there on the bottom. So went ahead and did that while I was doing the deck because it ended up needing a couple coats to get it covered correctly. So when you're putting on your soap, just make sure everything's coated evenly, and when we go to rinse phase in a little bit, you're gonna get all of the soap off and then come back through. This is the way I do it. You come back through and get like moss and all the harder stuff that's stuck between the cracks after you've got all of your detergent rinsed off. The reason I do it that way is so that I don't end up with spots that are drying. And if you do let it dry, you'll end up with salt deposits and it can damage different surfaces. This is a composite deck, so it's a little bit tougher than wood in some aspects. But I still like to make sure that all the detergent, it stays wet when it's on and it gets rinsed off before it dries, and that way you don't run into those other issues. This part of the deck was extra nasty. We ended up having to do a couple coats on there. You can do a stronger mix. It wasn't really necessary to do a stronger mix. I just came back and hit it again after this, just to get real deep down in there. And you can put this spray nozzle closer to the deck surface itself and kind of scrub some of that off using the fan tip. It's not putting pressure on there, so it's not going to damage anything, but it does give it enough agitation to pull the top layer of the organics off and give access to the chemical inside the organics and kill it faster. Alright, now we're going into the rinse phase, and what I'm using here is just the ball valve. So I rig up my pressure washers so that there's a male end on the ball valve, and it acts as a nozzle when you don't have a gun on the end of it. The reason that I'm just using the ball valve here is because there's a high amount of water that comes out. You can cover a lot of surface area, but you're not getting a lot of splashback on these stairs. And you don't run the risk of putting too much pressure in one area. So I'm rinsing off all the big chunks, and then like I said before, you come back and get all the crevices after you've got all the soap off of it. That way you're not letting the soap just sit there too long and dry. It's also a good idea while you're doing this to spray down the bushes, any plants, re-wet them again. We like to pre-wet everything so that any detergent that does get on there is not going to hit the plant directly. It's going to get diluted immediately with the water from pre-wetting it. But when you're on rinse phase, it's good to re-rinse everything green or everything living around, just to, again, mitigate plant damage, property damage. So just like putting the soap on, when we're rinsing the soap off, we got to get every angle. You saw in that last scene there, getting all the different angles of the railing. And when you're quoting these things, you can't go just off of square footage of the flat surface. You have to think about how much railing, what type of railing, whether or not it's accessible, and factor that into how much time it's going to take you. So we switched over to an M5 twist nozzle here to get some of the moss out from between these cracks. It works really well because you can change the amount of water that's going out of the end of the gun, and also change the spread. So right now it's closed down pretty heavily so that we can get enough force to get the moss out without putting too much force on the actual decking material itself. So the M5 twist nozzle is a great option for being able to change rinsing wide or rinsing directly into the cracks like this. This was all green right here. No more green left. This area was all green. No more green left there. And here, this was all nasty. This area looks a lot nicer. This had a ton of moss in it. And that was all green.